Thank you, Stan. I think Stan is doing a fabulous job here this evening. He's certainly the best that this kind of money can buy. But no, I'm kidding. Come on, we got to lighten up here a little bit. I got a call a couple of months ago or a month ago from Bill Wilson from Johnstown, and he said, "Did you hear the great news?" And I said, "No, what?" And he said, "Jack's going into the Hall of Fame." And I remember two words came to my mind, and I spoke them to Bill. Jack who? Hammer, it's good to see you tonight. You're looking good. I didn't know Sheets has rented tuxedos, but that's... I have an extremely difficult job here, and I'll tell you what it is. We all know what it is to hear somebody get up at a banquet and speak. The most difficult job I have is to tell you about this guy that I want to present to you for this Hall of Fame award and try to make you understand how much I mean these things and how important this man has been, and in many ways, I must confess, still is in my life. Earl Strohm. He's a man of enormous character, integrity, reputation. These things are probably best defined as how one responds to difficult situations. It's sort of like I'm reminded of one story about the burglar out in Beverly Hills sneaking through a dark mansion there to steal whatever he could. And the house is pitch black. It's about 10,000 square feet. He's inching along the wall, and he happens to look across the room, and there are two fiery eyes about 3.5 feet off the ground staring at him. And in the darkness he hears a voice say, "Jesus is watching you." And he freezes in his tracks. And he takes a few more steps. The eyes grow a little brighter, and the voice says, "Jesus is watching you." Needing to get to the bottom of this, he inches along, finds the light switch, flips it on, and there, sitting on its haunches, is about a 130-pound German Shepherd. Next to the German Shepherd is a bird cage with a parrot in it. The parrot says, "Jesus is watching you." The man, somewhat relieved, says to the bird, "Silly bird, don't you know any other words?" The bird says, "Sure I do. Sick 'em, Jesus." Perhaps that is a crucial situation, and one finds out how you react to that only when you get in that situation. Earl is that kind of man. He's a man of enormous character. He's a simple man. I had a good pleasure to spend some time with him yesterday and today. I asked him about his tuxedo. He was fiddling with his tie. I said, "Coach, how do you feel? Are you relaxed?" He said, "No." I said, "I hate these things." And he didn't know he hated them until tonight, because this is the first one he said he's ever had on in his life. He said, "I married 5 daughters, Mike, and I married them all in the same suit. And that suit was good enough for my daughter's wedding. I should have it on tonight." I've told you he's a tough guy now, but he's not a talker. We all know that Coach Strohm is not a talker, and never has been. He's led by example. It's no secret that Coach had a health problem a couple of years ago. He and I were talking about it, and he had a stroke. And I had heard through the grapevine, living in Tennessee, that he had had this stroke and was concerned. And a lot of folks in town were concerned for Earl's health. I get the story from him. I said, "Coach, how you feeling?" He said, "Great. I feel great." I said, "Well, how did you come back from the stroke?" He said, "Yeah, I just walked it off." And we're talking about a pretty tough guy here. Decided to try to get in touch with a couple of guys that I played with at Altoona and reminisce about Coach Strohm. The best things to tell about a man are the under fire in the heat of battle and how he treats his men, so to speak. I called up a favorite friend of mine from years gone by. I don't see him a lot, but he just took an assistant coaching job with the Packers, Buddy Geis. Buddy was a wide receiver and loved that pass. You know, he just lived to catch the ball. Do you remember that, Coach? All Buddy ever wanted to do was catch that ball. Now, you have to understand what Coach Strohm's philosophy of football was. This guy made Woody Hayes look like a wide-open attack, okay? To Earl, a forward pass was a serious fumble for a real big gain, okay? You take him if you get him, fine, but let's not get into that territory too often. We were recalling playing Johnstown out at Mansion Park our senior year, and what a guy of few words and man committed to the mission that Earl was. I saw Steve Thompson here tonight, and Steve's older brother Dave was on the team with Buddy and I. We were all seniors together, and we were driving on Johnstown. We had a drive going, we had momentum going. Dave went down right in front of our bench with something. I don't know, but Buddy remembers clearly in his mind, Earl not wanting to break the momentum, hollering at somebody on the bench, "Roll that boy off and let's get this drive going." Now, supposedly, so that you won't think too harsh of Coach Strohm, supposedly Wally Fields, the late Wally Fields, wonderful backfield coach, said to Coach Strohm after the game, "Gee, Earl, you were a little hard on Dave there, I thought, didn't you, when he went down?" And Earl said, "Well, Wally, I saw his eyes were open. I figured he wasn't hurt too bad." Coach Strohm also was a guy noted for his sort of a taciturn approach, you know, and a lot of people couldn't imagine him in an emotional situation. And I remember this. My junior year, I was an alternate fullback with Bill Books. Coach, you remember Bill? He was about 162, 63 pounds, tough as could be. And he and I was a junior, Billy was a senior, and we alternated fullback. And we were in Johnstown, and it was one of those typical Earl Strohm, Johnstown, Altoona games, 3 yards, 4 yards. Bill and I were altering back and forth, and it so happens that the plays on mine that were being called happened to be working a little better. I was on the sidelines next to Coach Strohm, and he would send us in substitutions, what have you. And the one time I ever saw Coach rattled, or excited. He wasn't rattled, he was excited. We were on the 10-yard line going in. I was on the sidelines. Coach looked around, he looked right at me, and he said, where's that big fella? Get that big fella in there. And I said, "Coach, I think you mean me." And he said, "Yeah, you, get in there." Coach Strohm also never missed an opportunity to motivate a player. I remember, Coach, I hope you're remembering these things. It's bad to let him up here after I'm done, isn't it? I think we were playing Sharon in Mansion Park. Now, we went down to Sharon my junior year and got the living daylights kicked out of us. Sharon came here our senior year, and everything we did that night went right. I think we beat them 56-7 or something. We just absolutely blew them out. A strange thing happened. We had a big, old, friendly, wonderful, lovable, good football player, John Kaltenbrunner, who was a tackle. Y'all remember John? John had no teeth. If those of you that knew John, and John's reason for having no teeth, he claimed, was he tried catching a golf ball in his mouth, and with very little success. I'm not making that up. That was John's explanation. We had the game well in hand. It's middle of the third quarter, and on the films you can see John running off the field into our locker room. And so we said, Coach, sent a substitution in, who I don't really recall off the top of my head who it was. A few more series went by, and John finally came out. And we find out later, we all thought it was funny, we find out later that literally John had to go to the bathroom. I mean, he must have been serious. He had to go to the bathroom, and there was not going to be any stopping this, all right? Well, when this evidence and this news of this event and this happening got to Coach Strohm, we were on Monday looking at films and talking about the game, and Coach announced to us that John left the field simply because he had to go to the bathroom. And not wanting to miss an opportunity to motivate a young man, Coach looked at John and said, "John, son, the next time an opponent frightens you that much, you let me know and I'll get you out of there a little earlier." Knowing I was going to come up here and talk about Coach, I remembered a story I want to pass on to you. Coach Strohm and I, my senior year, we went down to Hershey to the Big 33 game. Coach was hired as an assistant coach, and I was on the team as a player. And Lefty James, was that his name? Lefty James was the head coach, and it was a less than fulfilling experience all the way around. Coach James just didn't see much in me as an athlete. Do you remember that, Coach? I think I pulled a hamstring or whatever, I don't know, but I guess things didn't work, and maybe I was as bad as he said I was during that week and in that game. So we got the daylights kicked out of us by Texas, and I went off, and then a few months later to Penn State, and I'm a freshman down there, and the late Rip Engel came up to me, and he said, you know, you've got a real fan, a supporter up in Altoona. And I said, who's that, Coach? And he said, your former coach, Earl Strohm. He told me that Lefty James came up to him, Rip, after the game and said, you know, he knew I was going to Penn State, and he said, you know, Rip, I don't think much of that Reid kid as a ball player. He said, you know, I said, what'd you say to him, Coach Engel? And he said, I told him what Earl Strohm said to me. Earl Strohm said to me that he didn't think much of you as a coach. And that, Mike, frankly, Earl Strohm's opinion far outweighed Lefty James' opinion. I got to thinking one more thing here. There are two men in my early years that had a profound effect on me. One is my dad. He always taught my brothers, Bill and Gare and I, the one thing I remember was, if you're going to start something, don't stop in the middle of it. Finish it. And the other was Earl. And I got to thinking about the first time, or what was truly the beginning of my athletic life. What was for me the beginning of understanding what it is to live up to a promise you make to a man, and what it is when you first realize for the first time in your life what it is to try to live up to a promise that you make to yourself. I was a junior, it was in the off season, and I was in the cafeteria going into my lunch line there, and Coach Strohm came into the cafeteria, and we were going to be in a few months preparing for my senior year, our senior year. And he very gently put his hand on my shoulder and he said, son, we're thinking of making you the starting fullback. Do you think you can handle that job? And I remember looking at him and saying very simply, I'll do the best I can, Coach. And you have to understand what it meant to be coached by a man like Earl Strohm. A fate worse than death itself was to ever disappoint a man like Earl Strohm. It wasn't that you would suffer any great wrath or any great chewing out. It was just that somehow, even at that age, if you could not articulate in words what this man was, you sensed he was a man of enormous honesty and integrity and character, who knew of no other way to go about things than simply give it everything you have. And you know, I got to thinking that in some ways, if not on a conscious level, throughout the remainder of my athletic life, which lasted a lot of years after that, in some ways, as I say, if not on a conscious level, I felt the weight, the gentle weight of that hand on my shoulder, and the firm yet soft voice of that man saying, do you think you can do the job? And I suppose now that my wife and I are off into another venture, a music venture, I still in some ways can feel the weight of that hand on my shoulder and that voice saying to me, kid, do you think you can do the job? And I suppose that's the first time I understood what it is to try to live up to a promise that you make to yourself, and try to live up to a promise that you make to a man like Earl Strohm. I'm very, very, very lucky that I met this man at the age of 15, and I'm very, very lucky that he had a lasting, profound impact on my life. I would like to present to all of you now, for induction into the Blair County Hall of Fame, this most wonderfully deserving man, Coach Earl Strohm.